I should have walked away when Jessica said those words. She's too poor to be here. The entire reunion heard her. 20 years of friendship, and that's how she chose to destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. But here's what Jessica didn't know, what none of them knew as they watched me stand there humiliated in my thrift store dress while she flaunted her designer everything like some queen. 6 months ago, I won the lottery, $47 million, and I'd been sitting on that secret, living quietly, testing who my real friends truly were. Well, Jessica just failed that test spectacularly. What happened next? Let me tell you exactly how I turned her cruelty into the sweetest revenge of my entire life. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. 3 weeks before the reunion, I stood in my bedroom holding that glossy invitation, my hands actually shaking, and the thought of seeing Jessica Hartwell again made my stomach twist into knots. Should I even go? Part of me wanted to throw that invitation in the trash and spend Saturday night binge-watching Netflix like a normal person. But I couldn't stop staring at her name on the planning committee, because of course she was on it. Jessica always had to be in charge, always had to be the center of attention, and even in high school she made sure everyone knew she was better than the rest of us, with her better clothes, better car, better everything, while I was her charity case, best friend, the one she kept around to make herself look good. I remember junior year when my mom lost her job at the factory and Jessica knew I was struggling, knew I was working double shifts at the diner just to help with rent. But instead of being supportive, she started making these little comments like, "Oh, Sarah, you can't afford that restaurant. Let's go somewhere cheaper." And, "Don't worry about homecoming. Not everyone needs an expensive dress." Always said with this fake, sweet smile like she was doing me a favor by pointing out how poor I was. And the worst part is I thought she was being kind. I actually thanked her for being so understanding about my family's situation. How pathetic was that? I walked to my closet and stared at my clothes where everything looked so ordinary, so basic. Which was funny because I could afford to buy out the entire mall now. But nobody knew that. Nobody knew that 6 months ago my life changed forever when I matched all 6 numbers on that Tuesday night drawing, $47 million, and I'd told exactly 3 people, my lawyer, my financial advisor, and my accountant. Why keep it secret? Because money changes everything. It changes how people see you, how they treat you, what they expect from you, and I wanted to know who my real friends were before the dollar signs got in the way. I wanted to see people's true colors when they thought I was still that same struggling girl from high school. So I made a decision to go to this reunion. I'd wear something simple, something that wouldn't draw attention, and I'd watch and listen and see exactly what Jessica and the rest of them really thought about me when they believed I was still nobody special. Maybe it was a test, or maybe it was curiosity, or maybe deep down I was hoping Jessica had grown up, that she'd become a better person. But I should have known better. Jessica and I became friends in freshman year when she sat next to me in biology class and whispered, "Your hair is so pretty. I wish mine was naturally curly like that." And I was so starved for friendship, so desperate to belong somewhere, that I latched onto her kindness like a lifeline, not realizing it was the beginning of 20 years of subtle cruelty disguised as concern. She lived in Maple Heights, the fancy neighborhood with the big houses and circular driveways, while I lived in the apartment complex on Elm Street where the paint peeled and the air conditioner barely worked, and Jessica made sure I never forgot the difference between us, always in the sweetest possible way. "Oh, Sarah, you're so lucky you don't have to worry about keeping up with fashion trends," she'd say when I wore the same jeans 3 days in a row. Or, "I admire how you're not materialistic like everyone else," when I couldn't afford to go shopping with her and her other friends. She had this way of making my poverty sound like a personality trait, like I chose to struggle, like it was some noble characteristic, instead of the reality that my single mom worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. When prom came around junior year, Jessica spent weeks talking about her $1,500 dress while I saved every penny from my job at the hardware store to afford a $75 dress from the discount rack. And when she saw me at the dance, she actually said, "You look so authentic, by Sarah, not trying too hard like everyone else." And I smiled and thanked her because I didn't understand that authentic was just her code word for cheap. She'd invite me to pool parties at her house, then make comments about how I was brave for wearing a one-piece swimsuit, or she'd suggest we all go to expensive restaurants, then act surprised when I said I couldn't afford it, offering to cover me this time, with this patronizing smile that made me feel like a charity case. The worst part wasn't even the comments, it was how she trained me to be grateful for them. How she convinced me that pointing out my financial situation was actually kindness, that she was protecting me from embarrassment by managing my expectations, and I believed her because I was 17 and lonely, and I thought having a friend who acknowledged my struggles was better than having no friends at all. Looking back now, I can see exactly what she was doing. She was keeping me around as her pet poor friend, someone to make her feel generous and superior, someone who would always be grateful for whatever scraps of attention she threw my way, and I played that role perfectly for 4 entire years. 6 months ago, on a Tuesday night, in March, I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment, eating ramen noodles and watching the lottery drawing on my ancient television, holding a ticket I'd bought with my last $5. Because sometimes, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, you need to believe in impossible dreams. And when those numbers started matching mine one by one, I thought I was hallucinating from too much overtime at the insurance office where I processed claims for $8 an hour. 14, 27, 31, 42, 48, and the Powerball number 9. Every single digit, exactly what I'd chosen using my grandmother's birthday and my mom's anniversary. And suddenly, I was holding a ticket worth $47 million. Enough money to change everything, to fix everything, to become someone completely different. But here's the thing about sudden wealth that nobody tells you. It's terrifying because you realize that every relationship in your life might have been built on who you were when you had nothing, and now you don't know if people will love you or love your bank account. So I made a choice that probably sounds crazy to most people. I decided to live exactly the same life I'd always lived. Same apartment, same job, same used Honda Civic with the rattling exhaust pipe, because I wanted to see who my real friends were before everything changed forever. I told my lawyer, my financial advisor, and my accountant because I had to. But everyone else in my life continued seeing me as broke Sarah, who brought bag lunches to work and shopped at thrift stores, and honestly, it was fascinating watching how people treated me when they thought I was still struggling. My coworkers would still make those little comments about my generic brand coffee or my discount shoes. Friends would still expect me to split cheap dinners and skip expensive activities, and dates would still suggest we go Dutch or pick restaurants they thought I could afford, and through it all, I was sitting on enough money to buy their entire neighborhoods. The hardest part was restraining myself from helping people, from fixing their problems with money they didn't know I had, watching my mom stress about her mortgage payments while I had enough cash to buy her a mansion. But I needed to know who would stand by me when they thought I was nobody special, who would treat me with kindness and respect even when they believed I had nothing to offer except my friendship. That's why I decided to go to this reunion as ordinary Sarah, one last test before I revealed the truth and changed my life forever, and Jessica was about to show me exactly who she really was. The Marriott ballroom was decorated with our school colors, blue and gold streamers everywhere, and class photos from 20 years ago mounted on easels like museum exhibits of our younger, more hopeful selves, and I walked through those glass doors wearing a simple black dress from Target that cost me $39, my hair in a basic ponytail, carrying a small purse I'd owned since college, looking exactly like what everyone expected broke Sarah to look like. The room buzzed with conversations and laughter, people clustering around the bar and the memory boards. And that's when I saw her across the room, like some kind of fashion magazine come to life. Jessica Hartwell, in a stunning red designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair perfectly styled in loose waves, diamond earrings, catching the light every time she moved her head. And she was holding court near the registration table, surrounded by our former classmates who were hanging on her every word like she was some kind of celebrity. She spotted me almost immediately, those sharp blue eyes scanning me from head to toe in that way she used to do, taking inventory of everything I was wearing and calculating its approximate value. And I watched her face shift from surprise to something that looked almost like pity, mixed with satisfaction, like she was pleased to see that nothing about me had changed, that I was still the same struggling girl she remembered from high school. "Sarah!" she called out, her voice carrying across the room with that fake enthusiasm she'd perfected over the years, and I made my way over to her group, feeling every eye on me as they compared my simple outfit to her glamorous ensemble, and when she hugged me it was one of those air kisses that doesn't actually touch, the kind rich people give when they don't want to mess up their makeup. "Oh my God, you look exactly the same," she said, and somehow she made it sound like an insult, like the fact that I hadn't transformed into some successful businesswoman was proof of my inherent failure. And the little circle of people around her smiled uncomfortably because they could sense the tension even if they couldn't quite put their finger on what was wrong. "Jessica, you look incredible," I said, because what else do you say when someone is clearly showing off their wealth like a peacock displaying its feathers? And she did a little twirl to show off her dress, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light as she moved, and I realized in that moment that she was performing, putting on a show not just for me, but for everyone watching, establishing the hierarchy right from the start, making sure everyone knew who was successful and who was still struggling, who had made it and who was still stuck in the same place they'd been 20 years ago. "So, Sarah, what are you up to these days?" Jessica asked with that bright smile that never reached her eyes. And before I could answer, she was already scanning my outfit again, lingering on my shoes, which were clean, but obviously not expensive, and I could see her mental calculator working overtime as she assessed everything from my drugstore makeup to my simple silver earrings that definitely weren't real diamonds. "I'm working at Consolidated Insurance downtown," I said, and immediately regretted being so honest because Jessica's eyebrows shot up like I'd just announced I was unemployed, and she turned to Michael Roberts, who was standing next to us, and said, "Oh, that's so sweet. Sarah's always been so practical. Haven't you, Sarah? Always choosing stability over ambition." And the way she said practical made it sound like a character flaw, like being responsible was somehow boring or small-minded. "Insurance. Wow, that must be so steady," chimed in Amanda Walsh, who had clearly picked up on Jessica's condescending tone and was following her lead, and Jessica nodded enthusiastically and said, "Exactly. Some people just need that security, that predictability. Not everyone can handle the stress of entrepreneurship like some of us." And she gestured vaguely toward herself while explaining to the group how she'd started her own marketing consultancy and was doing so well she barely had time for vacations anymore. Poor thing. Then her eyes dropped to my purse, this little black bag I'd carried for years because it went with everything, and she actually pointed at it and said, "Oh my God, is that the same purse you had in college? I remember that bag." "You've really gotten your money's worth out of it, haven't you?" And everyone laughed like it was the most charming thing in the world, me being so frugal and practical with my ancient accessories. "And your hair," she continued, reaching out to touch one of my curls without asking permission. "You're still doing it yourself, I see. That's so refreshing. All these women spending hundreds on salon treatments when natural is so much more authentic." And there was that word again, authentic, her favorite code for cheap. And I stood there smiling and nodding while she systematically dismantled everything about my appearance under the guise of compliments, making me sound like some kind of noble savage who'd chosen poverty as a lifestyle statement rather than someone who simply couldn't afford better. And the worst part was watching our former classmates nod along, buying into her narrative that my financial struggles were somehow admirable rather than heartbreaking, that I was inspiring in my determination to remain exactly where I'd always been. As more people gathered around our little group, Jessica seemed to gain confidence, like having an audience energized her need to establish dominance, and she started speaking louder, making sure her comments about me could be heard by anyone within earshot, and I could see people turning their heads, drawn by the spectacle of whatever was happening between us. "You know what I love about Sarah?" she announced to the growing crowd. "She's never changed, never gotten caught up in all the materialistic nonsense the rest of us fell into. Look at her, still shopping at the same places, still living that simple life we all left behind, and the way she emphasized simple made it clear she meant something else entirely." And I watched faces in the crowd start to shift as people began picking up on the undercurrent of cruelty in her voice. Kevin Martinez, who'd been our class treasurer, raised his eyebrows and exchanged a look with his wife, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he realized Jessica wasn't actually complimenting me, and Lisa Chen stepped a little closer, like she was watching a car accident happen in slow motion and couldn't look away. "Remember in high school when Sarah would bring those adorable brown bag lunches while the rest of us bought cafeteria food?" Jessica continued, and now she was really performing, gesturing with her wine glass and speaking to the room like she was giving a toast. And now, here she is, 20 years later, still brown bagging it, I bet, still taking the bus, still living in that same neighborhood. It's just so consistent, so wonderfully unchanged, and the word unchanged hung in the air like a slap, and I could hear someone behind me whisper, "Oh my God, is she serious right now?" While someone else murmured, "This is getting uncomfortable." But Jessica was just getting started, riding the wave of attention like she was back in high school giving a speech for homecoming queen, and she turned to face me directly, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she said, "I just think it's incredible how some people can be so content with so little. It takes a special kind of person to never want more, never dream bigger, never feel like they deserve better than what they started with." And now the whispers were getting louder. People were definitely talking, and I could see our former drama teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, shaking her head in disgust, while Tom Bradley actually took a step back, like he didn't want to be associated with whatever was happening. And that's when I realized Jessica had crossed a line that everyone could see. The breaking point came when someone mentioned the silent auction and suggested we all check out the prizes they were offering, expensive vacation packages, and jewelry and artwork donated by successful alumni. And Jessica grabbed my arm with those perfectly manicured nails and said, "Oh, Sarah, you should definitely look, but don't feel pressured to bid on anything. I know how these fundraising events can be awkward when you're on a tight budget." And I tried to pull away, but she held on tighter, her voice getting louder and more theatrical as she continued. "Actually, maybe we should start a separate auction with more affordable items. You know, things from Target or Walmart, stuff that's more accessible to everyone." And now people were openly staring because her tone had shifted from condescending to outright malicious, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment as she kept going. "I mean, let's be honest here. Some people just don't belong in spaces like this. Some people can't afford to participate in the same activities as everyone else, and that's okay. That's not their fault. But maybe we should acknowledge the reality of the situation instead of pretending we're all on the same level when we're obviously not." The entire ballroom seemed to go quiet around us, conversation stopping mid-sentence as people realized they were witnessing something terrible, and Jessica looked around at all the faces watching us, seeming to feed off the attention, and that's when she delivered the line that would haunt me for weeks afterward, her voice crystal clear and deliberately cruel as she said, "I mean, honestly, everyone, she's too poor to be here. We all know it. She knows it. So why are we all pretending otherwise? It's just embarrassing for everyone involved, especially her. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning humming and glasses clinking at the bar across the room, and I felt something break inside my chest. Not just my heart, but my dignity, my sense of self-worth, everything I'd built up over the years to convince myself that I was valuable regardless of my bank account. And I stood there frozen while 50-plus people stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to pity to secondhand embarrassment. And Jessica stood there with this satisfied smile like she'd just won some kind of contest, completely unaware that she'd just destroyed a friendship and humiliated someone who had never done anything to deserve it. And in that moment I realized that 20 years hadn't changed her at all. She was still the same cruel person she'd always been, just with better clothes and more confidence. Standing there in that circle of shocked faces, I felt like I was drowning in plain sight, my chest tight and my hands shaking as the full weight of what Jessica had just done to me crashed over me like a wave, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to grab my purse and walk out of that ballroom with whatever dignity I had left, to go home to my little apartment and pretend this night had never happened, to disappear back into my quiet life where people couldn't hurt me like this. My legs felt weak and my vision was getting blurry with tears I refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of all these people who were staring at me like I was some kind of tragic figure, some cautionary tale about what happens when you don't make something of yourself. And I could hear Jessica behind me laughing with someone about something completely different, like she hadn't just eviscerated me in front of our entire graduating class, like destroying me had been so easy and meaningless that she'd already moved on to other entertainment. The exit was right there, maybe 20 steps away, and I started to turn toward it, started to take that first step toward escape, when something hot and fierce flared up in my stomach, something that had been building for 20 years of accepting Jessica's cruelty as normal, 20 years of letting her make me feel small and grateful and less than. And I realized that walking away now would be exactly what she expected me to do, exactly what she wanted, proof that she was right about me, that I was too weak and too poor and too pathetic to stand up for myself. The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow, the absolute unfairness of being humiliated for something that wasn't even true anymore, for a financial situation that hadn't existed for 6 months by someone who had no idea what my life actually looked like now. And I thought about that $47 million sitting in my accounts, about the power I had that she couldn't even imagine, about how wrong she was about everything, and I felt something shift inside me, something cold and calculated, replacing the hurt and embarrassment. Why should I run away and let her win when I held all the cards? Why should I let her have this moment of triumph when I could turn everything around with just a few words? The room was still quiet, people still watching, waiting to see what I would do, and instead of walking toward that exit, I turned around to face Jessica, my voice steady for the first time all evening as I said, "Actually, we need to talk." I made it exactly 3 steps toward Jessica before my courage faltered, and I veered toward the restroom instead, my hands trembling as I pushed through the heavy door into the quiet sanctuary of marble counters and soft lighting. And I gripped the sink edge so hard my knuckles went white, staring at my reflection in the mirror and trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong, so fast, trying to understand how I'd let Jessica reduce me to this shaking, humiliated version of myself when I had the power to destroy her entire worldview with a single sentence. That's when the door opened behind me and Rachel Thompson walked in. Rachel, who'd been the quiet one in our friend group, the one who actually listened when people talked, the one who never participated in Jessica's cruel games, and she took one look at my face and said, "Jesus Christ, Sarah, are you okay?" And her voice was so full of genuine concern that I almost started crying right there. I heard what she said out there, Rachel continued, moving to stand next to me at the mirror. And I need you to know that everyone thinks she's completely out of line. Like, seriously. People are talking about how awful that was, how totally inappropriate and mean spirited. And I just want you to know that whatever's going on with Jessica, whatever made her think she could talk to you like that, it says everything about her and nothing about you. She handed me a tissue from her purse and leaned against the counter, her voice getting quieter but more intense as she said, "You know what I remember about high school? I remember you working 2 jobs and still getting better grades than half our class. I remember you helping people with their homework, even when you barely had time to do your own. I remember you being kind to everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. And I remember Jessica treating you like garbage while you just took it because you thought that's what friendship looked like." Rachel's words hit me like a revelation because here was someone who'd been watching all along. Someone who'd seen through Jessica's fake kindness to the cruelty underneath, and she continued, "I don't know what your situation is now, financially or otherwise, but I know who you are as a person, and that woman out there doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you, let alone humiliate you in front of everyone we went to school with." She squeezed my shoulder and looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Whatever you're thinking about doing next, whatever you're planning, I'm on your side, and I think it's time someone put Jessica Hartwell in her place." Rachel's words were exactly what I needed to hear, the validation I'd been craving for 20 years, and as I looked at myself in that bathroom mirror, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The scared little girl who'd been grateful for Jessica's scraps of friendship finally dying and being replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was worth. And I realized that this moment wasn't just about tonight. It was about every cruel comment Jessica had ever made, every time she'd made me feel small and grateful and less than. Every instance where I'd smiled and thanked her for pointing out my flaws, and I was done, completely finished being her victim. "Rachel," I said, my voice steadier than it had been all evening, "what if I told you that Jessica has no idea who she just messed with?" And something in my tone must have gotten Rachel's attention because her eyebrows went up and she leaned closer, and I made a decision that would change everything. Not just for tonight, but for the rest of my life. Because I was tired of hiding, tired of being ashamed of money I'd earned through pure luck, tired of pretending to be someone I wasn't just to test people who'd already shown me their true colors. The plan started forming in my mind, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. And I could see exactly how this was going to go, how I was going to turn Jessica's cruelty back on her in the most poetic way possible, using her own weapons against her, her need for attention, her obsession with status, her complete inability to imagine that anyone she'd written off could possibly have more than she did. "I need you to do me a favor," I told Rachel. "I need you to go back out there and keep Jessica talking. Keep her center stage, make sure everyone's paying attention to her, because in about 10 minutes she's going to get the shock of her miserable life. And I want maximum audience for what comes next." Rachel grinned at me like she could see the fire in my eyes, like she recognized that something had fundamentally changed in the dynamic between me and Jessica. And she said, "Whatever you're planning, I am here for it. That woman has had this coming for decades." And as she headed back toward the door, I called after her, "Oh, and Rachel, make sure someone's recording when things get interesting, because Jessica's about to learn that karma doesn't just exist in fairy tales." When I returned to the ballroom, I felt like I was seeing everything through new eyes, like I'd put on glasses that revealed hidden truths, and instead of avoiding Jessica, I moved closer to her group, positioning myself where I could listen without drawing attention, and it didn't take long to start picking up information that painted a very different picture of her perfect life than the one she was trying to project. I heard her talking to Mike Stevens about how crazy expensive private school tuition was for her daughter, how she and her husband were making sacrifices to afford it, and when someone mentioned the new BMW in the parking lot, she laughed a little too loudly and said, "Oh, that thing. Don't even ask about the payments. We're practically eating ramen every night to afford it. But you know how it is. You have to maintain appearances in my business." Then Linda Crawford brought up vacation plans, and Jessica's smile got tight as she explained that they were taking a break from travel this year, focusing on local adventures instead, which was clearly code for "we can't afford a real vacation." And when the conversation turned to the silent auction, Jessica made a big show of looking at the items, but I noticed she didn't actually bid on anything, just kept saying things like, "Oh, I'm being so good tonight," trying to stick to my budget, with that fake laugh that didn't fool anyone who was really paying attention. The most revealing moment came when David Park mentioned something about his investment portfolio, and Jessica jumped in with, "Oh, don't even talk to me about investments right now. We had to liquidate some assets recently for a business opportunity. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. You know how it is." And I could practically smell the desperation beneath her confident tone, the way she was spinning what was obviously a financial crisis into some kind of strategic business move. She kept checking her phone, and at one point, I heard her tell someone, "I'm waiting to hear back about a big contract. Could really change everything for us." And there was something almost manic in her voice, like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else, and I realized that this whole performance tonight, this need to humiliate me so publicly, wasn't just about maintaining her superiority complex. It was about desperately trying to make herself feel better about her own failing finances by tearing down someone she assumed was still beneath her, someone whose poverty made her feel rich by comparison. And the irony was so perfect, I almost felt sorry for her. Armed with the knowledge that Jessica was struggling financially while pretending to be successful, I decided it was time to start planting some seeds of my own, and I walked over to the bar where I ordered a glass of their most expensive champagne, the kind that costs $60 a glass, and when the bartender raised his eyebrows, I just smiled and said, "Put it on my tab, and actually make it 2 glasses. I'm celebrating," loud enough for the people nearby to hear, including Tom Bradley, who immediately looked confused because this was not broke Sarah behavior. I casually pulled out my phone and pretended to check messages, then made a soft sound and said to no one in particular, "My financial advisor always texts at the worst times, something about quarterly dividends being higher than expected," and I watched as heads turned in my direction, people trying to process this information that didn't fit with what they thought they knew about me. And I slipped the phone back into my purse like it was no big deal, like getting texts from financial advisors was just part of my normal Tuesday routine. When someone asked what I was celebrating, I gave them a mysterious smile and said, "Oh, just some good news about an investment that finally paid off. Nothing too dramatic. But you know how it is when you take a risk and it actually works out." And I could see the wheels turning in their heads as they tried to reconcile this new information with Jessica's earlier proclamations about my poverty. And the best part was watching Jessica herself start to look uncomfortable as she overheard fragments of these conversations, her confident smirk beginning to slip as doubt crept in. I made sure to tip the bartender generously, pulling out $100 bill like it was nothing. And when Karen Walsh complimented my dress, I laughed and said, "This old thing? I just grabbed something simple, didn't want to overdress. You know how I hate being flashy." And the word simple suddenly sounded different coming from my mouth than it had coming from Jessica's, like I was choosing modesty rather than having it forced on me by circumstances. Throughout all of this, I kept my tone casual and unassuming, never bragging or showing off, just dropping little hints that suggested my financial situation might not be what everyone assumed, and I could see people starting to whisper, starting to question the narrative Jessica had built around me, and every time I caught Jessica's eye across the room, her expression got a little more strained, a little more uncertain. Jessica must have sensed that something was shifting because she started watching me more carefully, her eyes narrowing every time I laughed or smiled or acted like anything other than the broken, humiliated person she'd tried to create with her earlier performance. And when she overheard me casually mentioning something about tax implications to Rachel, she marched over with that fake, bright smile cranked up to 11 and said, "Sarah, sweetie, I hope you're not trying to impress people with made-up stories about money. That would be so embarrassing, especially after what we all just witnessed." Her voice dripping with condescension as she looked around at the people nearby, clearly expecting them to join in her mockery. But when nobody laughed, when people actually looked uncomfortable with her comment, Jessica's smile got tighter and she decided to go nuclear, her voice getting louder as she said, "I mean, come on everyone. We all know Sarah's situation. We just heard about it. She can barely afford to be here tonight. So let's not pretend that suddenly she's some kind of successful businesswoman just because she ordered an expensive drink, probably maxing out her credit card to keep up appearances, which is honestly kind of sad if you think about it." The room was getting uncomfortably quiet again. People were starting to step back from Jessica like she was radioactive, and you could practically feel the second-hand embarrassment radiating from everyone who was witnessing this meltdown. But Jessica was beyond caring about social cues, beyond reading the room. She was spiraling and taking everyone down with her as she continued. "And this whole thing about financial advisors and investments, please, we're talking about someone who probably still shops at Goodwill and thinks Olive Garden is fancy dining. So let's just be real here. Instead of enabling these delusions of grandeur, it's not helping anyone, especially not her." Amanda Walsh actually took a step backward and whispered, "Oh my God, stop." But Jessica was on a roll, gesturing wildly with her wineglass as she said, "I'm just trying to help her stay grounded in reality instead of floating off into some fantasy where she pretends to be something she's not. And honestly, I think it's cruel of all of you to encourage this kind of behavior when you know it's just going to end in disappointment and death. Someone needs to be the adult here and tell her the truth." That's when I decided it was time to stop playing games. Perfect timing, because right as Jessica finished her latest tirade about my supposed delusions of grandeur, my phone started ringing with the custom ringtone I'd set up for important calls. And I looked at the screen and saw Marcus Chen, Wealth Management, which was my financial advisor calling right on schedule, and I answered with a calm, "Hi Marcus, what's going on?" while the entire group fell silent, probably expecting it to be some telemarketer or wrong number that would prove Jessica's point about my pathetic life. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call during your event, but I wanted to update you on the Tesla position we discussed." Marcus's voice came through crystal clear on speakerphone, which I definitely hadn't intended, but wasn't going to complain about. "The stock split announcement pushed your shares up another 12% today, which puts your portfolio value at just over 8.2 million for that position alone." And I could literally hear people's jaws dropping around me while Jessica's face went completely white, her wineglass frozen halfway to her mouth. "Oh, that's wonderful news," I said, walking a few steps away from the group, but not so far they couldn't hear every word. "What about the real estate investments we talked about last week?" And Marcus continued, "The Manhattan property purchase went through, 2.8 million as discussed. And I've already had 3 offers from potential tenants at the rental rate we discussed. So that should start generating passive income within the month. And don't forget, we have that meeting Friday about the charitable foundation setup. The lawyers want to finalize the 10 million initial funding structure before the end of the quarter." I could see people staring at each other in shock, trying to process what they were hearing, while Jessica looked like she was about to be sick, her perfectly applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her pale skin. And I wrapped up the call with, "Thanks, Marcus. Let's discuss the details Friday. I'm at my high school reunion right now and should probably get back to catching up with old friends." And when I hung up the phone and turned back to face the group, the silence was so complete you could hear the music playing on the other side of the ballroom, and every single person was staring at me like they'd never seen me before in their lives. Word spread through the ballroom like wildfire, people gravitating toward our little drama like moths to a flame, and within minutes we had a crowd of at least 30 people forming a loose circle around us. everyone pretending to look at their drinks or check their phones while actually straining to hear every word of whatever was happening between Jessica and me, and I could see more people drifting over from the silent auction and the dance floor, sensing that something major was going down. Jessica was clearly rattled by the phone call, her hands shaking slightly as she set down her wine glass. But instead of backing down or apologizing or showing even a shred of decency, she decided to double down in the most spectacular way possible, her voice getting shrill as she said, "Oh, please, everyone, don't tell me you're actually falling for this pathetic performance. This is obviously some elaborate hoax, probably her friend calling and pretending to be a financial advisor because she is so desperate to save face after being exposed for what she really is." The crowd was getting uncomfortable. People were exchanging worried glances and whispering behind their hands, but Jessica was beyond caring about social norms, beyond reading the room. She was in full attack mode as she turned to face me directly and said, "You want to know what I think? I think you're so ashamed of your real life, so embarrassed about still being poor and pathetic after all these years, that you've resorted to creating these elaborate fantasies about being wealthy. And honestly, it's just sad. It's disturbing, and everyone here should be concerned about your mental health instead of enabling these delusions." She gestured wildly at the crowd, her voice carrying across the entire ballroom now, as she said, "This is what desperation looks like, people. This is what happens when someone can't accept their station in life, when they're so delusional that they think they can fool everyone with fake phone calls and pretend confidence. But we all know the truth. We all saw her walk in here tonight looking exactly like what she is, a broke loser who doesn't belong in the same room as the rest of us, and no amount of play acting is going to change that reality." The crowd was actively cringing now. People were looking away in embarrassment, and that's when I realized Jessica had just given me the perfect setup for what came next. She dug her own grave so deep that when I buried her in it, nobody would feel sorry for her. I let Jessica's words hang in the air for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall as she caught her breath from her unhinged rant. And then I smiled, not the grateful, apologetic smile I'd worn for 20 years of her abuse, but something cold and satisfied and absolutely certain. And when I finally spoke, my voice was so calm and quiet that people had to lean in to hear me, which made every word hit even harder. "Jessica," I said, pulling out my phone and opening my banking app, "6 months ago I won the Powerball lottery, $47 million after taxes, and I've been living quietly, keeping it secret, because I wanted to see who my real friends were before money changed everything, and congratulations. You just failed that test more spectacularly than I ever imagined possible." I held up my phone screen, showing my account balance, the numbers so large they seemed fake, and I watched Jessica's face crumble as the reality hit her, watched her eyes go wide with shock and disbelief, and then narrow with something that looked like panic, and I continued in that same deadly calm voice. "I've been sitting here all evening, listening to you humiliate me, watching you perform for this crowd, and the whole time I've had more money in my checking account than you'll probably see in your entire lifetime. But more importantly, I've been watching your character, seeing exactly who you really are when you think you have power over someone, and it's been absolutely fascinating." The crowd was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, and I could see people pulling out their phones to verify what I was showing them, some actually gasping when they realized the numbers were real, and I kept going, my voice never rising above conversational level. "You see, Jessica, I didn't just win the lottery. I won something much more valuable. I won clarity, the ability to see people's true nature, and what I've learned is that you're exactly the same, cruel, insecure person you were in high school, just with better clothes and a bigger platform for your cruelty. And the beautiful irony is that while you've been standing here telling everyone how poor and pathetic I am, you've actually been describing yourself, because I heard you talking earlier about your financial problems, your struggling business, your desperate need to liquidate assets, and now everyone else has heard it too." Jessica's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, and that's when I delivered the final blow. Jessica's face went through a series of expressions so quickly it was almost comical. Shock melting into disbelief, then panic, then a desperate kind of anger as she realized that everything she thought she knew about this situation had just been turned completely upside down. And she started shaking her head frantically and saying, "No, no, that's not possible. You're lying. This has to be some kind of trick." But her voice was getting higher and more hysterical, and people were already pulling out their phones to Google recent lottery winners. And when Amanda Walsh whispered, "Oh my God, it's true, Sarah Mitchell, $47 million. It was in all the papers 6 months ago." Jessica actually stumbled backward like she'd been physically struck. "But you're poor," Jessica said, and it came out as almost a whine, like a child whose worldview had just been shattered. "You're supposed to be poor. You've always been poor. You can't just suddenly be rich. That's not how this works." And the desperation in her voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and people in the crowd were starting to laugh, not with her, but at her, at the absurdity of someone melting down because their victim had turned out to be more successful than them. "You did this on purpose," Jessica continued, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "You came here tonight to embarrass me, to make me look bad. You set this whole thing up just to humiliate me." And the irony was so perfect that several people actually snorted with laughter, and Rachel stepped forward and said, "Jessica, you humiliated yourself. Sarah didn't say a single cruel word to you all evening. She just stood there and took your abuse until you went too far." And suddenly everyone was nodding in agreement. Suddenly the crowd that had been watching my humiliation with uncomfortable fascination was turning on Jessica like a pack of wolves sensing weakness. "I didn't know," Jessica kept saying over and over like a broken record. How was I supposed to know? She looked poor, she acted poor, she was wearing Target clothes. And with each word she dug herself deeper, making it clear that her cruelty hadn't been some unfortunate misunderstanding, but a deliberate choice to kick someone she thought was down. And Tom Bradley actually shook his head in disgust and said, "That doesn't make it okay, Jessica. That makes it worse." And suddenly Jessica was standing alone in the center of a circle of people who were looking at her with the same mixture of pity and contempt that she'd been directing at me all evening. Looking at Jessica standing there, shaking and desperate and completely stripped of the power she'd wielded so carelessly just minutes before, I felt something I didn't expect, not triumph or satisfaction or vindictive joy, but something closer to pity. Because seeing her like this made me realize that her cruelty had never really been about me at all. It had been about her own insecurities, her own fear of not being enough, her own desperate need to feel superior to someone, anyone, and I was just the convenient target she'd chosen to make herself feel better about her own failures. "Jessica," I said, my voice gentle but firm, cutting through her panicked rambling, and the entire room went quiet again, waiting to see how I would handle this moment, whether I would be as cruel to her as she had been to me. "I want you to understand something. I didn't come here tonight to humiliate you. I came here hoping that 20 years might have changed you, hoping that you'd grown into someone kinder, someone better. And when you started attacking me, I could have stopped you at any point. I could have shut you down with a single sentence, but I wanted to see how far you would go, how cruel you were willing to be to someone you thought couldn't fight back." I took a step closer to her, not threatening, just close enough that she had to look me in the eye, and I continued. "What happened here tonight wasn't about money, Jessica. It was about character, and you showed everyone in this room exactly who you are when you think nobody important is watching. You revealed yourself to be someone who kicks people when they're down, someone who finds joy in other people's pain, someone who uses their perceived advantages to hurt others, and that's not something money can fix." The crowd was hanging on every word, and I could see people nodding in agreement, but I wasn't done yet. "I hope someday you'll understand that the way you treated me tonight, the way you've treated people your entire life, says nothing about them and everything about you, and I hope you'll find a way to become the kind of person who builds others up instead of tearing them down. Because honestly, Jessica, despite everything you've done to me over the years, I don't want you to be miserable. I just want you to be better. Then I turned to address the entire room, my voice carrying across the ballroom as I said, I think we've all had enough drama for one evening. Driving home that night in my old Honda Civic, the one I'd kept despite being able to afford a fleet of luxury cars, I felt something I'd never experienced before in my entire life, a deep, unshakable sense of my own worth that had nothing to do with bank account balances or designer clothes or other people's opinions of me, and I realized that the lottery win had been just the beginning of my transformation, not the end, because the real prize wasn't the money. It was the clarity it gave me about who deserved to be in my life and who didn't. For 38 years, I'd been carrying around this belief that I had to be grateful for whatever scraps of affection people threw my way, that I should accept poor treatment because at least it was attention, that I should apologize for taking up space in the world, but standing up to Jessica, seeing her crumble when confronted with the truth, watching an entire room of people realize that kindness matters more than status, had rewired something fundamental in my brain, had shown me that I didn't have to accept cruelty disguised as friendship ever again. The money was going to change my life in practical ways. Obviously, I was already planning to buy my mom a house, to set up college funds for my nieces and nephews, to donate generously to causes that mattered to me. But the real change was internal, the knowledge that I could stand up for myself, that I could face down bullies with grace and strength, that I didn't need anyone's permission to take up space in the world. I thought about Rachel's words in the bathroom, about how she'd seen through Jessica's act all those years ago, and I made a mental note to nurture that friendship, to surround myself with people who saw my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. People who would celebrate my successes instead of trying to diminish them. People who understood that true friendship means building each other up rather than tearing each other down. Tomorrow I would start living differently, not just because I had money, but because I finally understood that I deserved respect, that I deserved kindness, that I deserved to be treated well, not because of what I could offer others, but because of who I was as a human being. And Jessica Hartwell, wherever she was nursing her wounded pride tonight, had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the gift of knowing my own strength.